There comes a moment in life when attention must turn inward, not out of selfishness, but out of necessity. When the soul has been scattered across expectations, disappointments, and borrowed identities, rebuilding becomes an act of survival. To rebuild yourself is not to erase who you were, but to consciously gather what was fragmented and shape it with intention. Most suffering begins when we abandon ourselves in order to be accepted. We learn to chase validation, approval, and reassurance, mistaking noise for meaning. Yet the psyche weakens when it is constantly oriented outward. Strength returns only when focus is reclaimed and directed back toward one's own inner order. Each day you focus on yourself, you restore authority over your life. Rebuilding is not dramatic. It is quiet. It happens in small, disciplined choices made consistently. It is choosing truth over comfort, awareness over distraction, responsibility over blame. The mind resists this work because it exposes inner conflict, but avoidance only deepens fragmentation. What you refuse to confront does not disappear, it waits, growing heavier. When focus is placed on inner development, the unconscious begins to cooperate. Energy once spent on resentment, comparison, and regret becomes available for growth. You stop asking who will save you and begin asking who you are becoming. This shift changes everything. The world responds differently when your center of gravity is within. To rebuild yourself is to accept your shadow without letting it rule you. It is to integrate pain into wisdom, fear into discipline, and desire into direction. You no longer react blindly, you respond consciously. It becomes less about control and more about alignment. Each day you focus on yourself, you lay one brick of psychological stability. Over time, that structure becomes strong enough to support love, purpose, and resilience. You are not rebuilding to escape the world, you are rebuilding so you can meet it without losing yourself again. Rebuilding yourself requires turning attention inward with honesty and responsibility, because no lasting change can occur while awareness remains directed solely toward the outer world. When attention is constantly absorbed by opinions, expectations, and comparisons, the inner life becomes neglected, and with neglect comes confusion. You may continue functioning, even achieving outward success, yet feel internally unstable, as if something essential has been misplaced. This instability is not a flaw of character, but a signal that the psyche is asking to be seen rather than escaped. Turning inward is the first act of courage, because it requires you to stop running from your own contradictions. Honesty with oneself is not a moral exercise, it is a psychological necessity. Without it, rebuilding becomes imitation rather than transformation. You cannot construct something solid on illusions about who you are or why you act as you do. When you begin to look inward honestly, you encounter discomfort, self-doubt, and unresolved emotion. These are often the very things you have spent years avoiding through distraction or blame. Responsibility enters at this point not as self-punishment, but as ownership. To say, "This is my inner world," is to reclaim power from circumstances and give it back to consciousness. Many people resist this inward turn because they fear what they might discover, yet what is buried within does not disappear. It influences behavior from below the surface. Unacknowledged fear becomes control, unexamined anger becomes withdrawal, and denied longing becomes resentment. Rebuilding yourself means bringing these forces into awareness so they can be shaped rather than allowed to sabotage. Responsibility is the willingness to recognize how your inner state participates in the life you experience, even when that recognition is uncomfortable. As attention moves inward, patterns begin to reveal themselves. You notice recurring reactions, familiar emotional loops, and habitual defenses. This observation is not meant to condemn you, but to inform you. Once something is seen clearly, it no longer has absolute power. You are no longer merely reacting to life. You are understanding how you meet it. With understanding comes choice, and with choice comes the possibility of change. This is how rebuilding begins, not with dramatic resolutions, but with sustained awareness. Responsibility also means accepting that no one else can do this work for you. Support can guide, but inner reconstruction is a solitary task. Waiting for rescue keeps you dependent on forces outside yourself. When you assume responsibility, you stop asking why life happened to you and begin asking how you will respond to it now. This shift strengthens the inner structure, creating stability that does not rely on external approval. As honesty deepens, self-respect emerges naturally. You begin to trust yourself because you are no longer deceiving yourself. This trust becomes the foundation upon which discipline, direction, and resilience are built. Rebuilding yourself through inward attention is not a retreat from life, but a preparation for it. When your inner world is ordered through honesty and responsibility, your outer life begins to reflect that order in subtle but powerful ways. Constant external validation weakens the psyche and fragments identity because it shifts the center of value away from the self and places it in the hands of others. When approval becomes the measure of worth, the inner compass loses its function. Decisions are no longer guided by inner truth, but by anticipation of response. Over time, this creates a divided inner life, where one part of the self performs for acceptance, while another part quietly withers for neglect. The psyche cannot remain whole when it is shaped primarily by reflection rather than substance. The need for validation is not inherently unhealthy. It becomes destructive when it replaces self-recognition. In such a state, identity is built from reactions rather than convictions. Each environment demands a different version of the self, and the individual learns to adapt endlessly, mistaking flexibility for authenticity. Yet these adaptations accumulate without integration, leaving behind a sense of emptiness. The more one depends on being seen, the less one actually knows who is being seen. This is how fragmentation begins, not through trauma alone, but through the slow erosion of inner authority. When validation is externalized, emotional stability becomes fragile. Praise creates elevation. Criticism creates collapse. The psyche oscillates between inflation and deflation, never resting in a grounded sense of being. This instability drains energy that could otherwise be used for growth. Instead of investing in inner development, the mind becomes preoccupied with managing impressions. Life turns into a performance. And performance cannot sustain meaning. Meaning arises from alignment between inner values and outer action, not from applause. Identity fragmentation deepens when disowned. Aspects of the self are suppressed to maintain approval. Traits deemed undesirable are hidden, denied, or projected onto others. This creates inner conflict as rejected parts continue to seek expression. The individual may feel inexplicably tense, irritable, or dissatisfied, unaware that the psyche is struggling to reconcile what is lived with what is denied. External validation demands consistency of image, but the human psyche is complex and contradictory. When complexity is denied, wholeness is sacrificed. Over time, the loss of inner reference leads to exhaustion. Constantly monitoring how one is perceived requires vigilance, and vigilance erodes spontaneity. The self becomes cautious, calculated, and disconnected from genuine feeling. Relationships formed under these conditions are often shallow because they are based on mutual reinforcement of roles rather than authentic presence. The individual may feel surrounded yet alone, affirmed yet unseen. Reclaiming the psyche requires withdrawing the demand for validation and redirecting attention inward. This does not mean rejecting others, but refusing to let their reactions define reality. As inner standards are re-established, identity begins to consolidate. The psyche regains coherence when worth is derived from self-knowledge rather than external approval. In this way, strength returns not through isolation, but through the restoration of an inner center that no longer fractures under the gaze of others. True transformation happens through small, disciplined daily choices because the psyche does not change through sudden insight alone, but through repetition that reshapes inner structure. Moments of realization may illuminate the path, yet without consistent action, they fade into memory, leaving behavior unchanged. The mind learns not from intention, but from what is practiced. Each small choice made daily sends a quiet message to the unconscious about who you are becoming, and over time those messages form identity. Discipline is often misunderstood as force or restriction, but in truth it is alignment. It is the agreement between awareness and action, renewed again and again in ordinary moments. When you choose to act in accordance with your values despite discomfort, you reinforce internal coherence. This coherence stabilizes the psyche, reducing inner conflict. Transformation does not demand dramatic sacrifices. It asks for reliability. The self begins to trust itself when words and actions repeatedly match. Small choices matter because they bypass resistance. Grand resolutions provoke fear and rebellion, while modest commitments invite participation. The psyche resists sudden upheaval but adapts readily to gradual change, choosing to show up, to observe rather than react, to complete what was started, builds inner strength without overwhelming the system. Over time, these actions accumulate, creating a foundation sturdy enough to support deeper change. Each disciplined choice weakens the pull of old patterns. Habits rooted in avoidance or self-betrayal lose power when they are not fed daily. Discipline interrupts unconscious repetition and introduces conscious direction. Even when progress feels invisible, the psyche is recording the effort. What appears insignificant in isolation becomes transformative through continuity. Consistency reshapes self-perception. You no longer see yourself as someone who tries, but as someone who acts. Daily discipline also cultivates patience, an essential quality for transformation. When focus shifts from immediate results to sustained practice, frustration diminishes. You learn to tolerate discomfort without abandoning yourself. This tolerance expands emotional capacity and resilience. Instead of seeking relief, you build strength. This is how the inner world becomes less reactive and more grounded. As discipline deepens, identity reorganizes itself around capability rather than intention. You begin to rely on your own structure instead of motivation. Motivation fluctuates, but discipline remains available. The psyche feels safer when there is predictability in behavior, and safety allows creativity and growth to emerge naturally. Transformation becomes less about forcing change and more about allowing it to unfold within a reliable framework. Through small, disciplined daily choices, life gradually aligns with inner values. The gap between who you are and who you wish to be narrows without strain. This quiet, persistent effort rewrites the inner narrative, not through promises, but through proof. Over time, you realize that transformation was never a single moment, but a series of ordinary decisions faithfully repeated. Avoidance strengthens inner conflict, while awareness integrates it, because whatever is pushed away from consciousness does not lose its energy. It merely shifts into the unconscious, where it continues to influence thoughts, emotions, and behavior indirectly. When difficult feelings, memories, or impulses are avoided, they become fragmented parts of the psyche, acting independently rather than being governed by awareness. This fragmentation creates tension, as the conscious mind attempts to maintain control, while unconscious material seeks expression in disguised forms. Avoidance often feels protective in the moment. Turning away from discomfort offers temporary relief, but that relief is deceptive. What is avoided accumulates pressure, much like unspoken words or unresolved emotions. Over time, this pressure manifests as anxiety, irritability, compulsive behavior, or emotional numbness. The individual may not recognize the source of this distress, only its symptoms. Inner conflict intensifies because the psyche is divided between what is acknowledged and what is denied. When awareness is absent, reactions become automatic. Old fears dictate present choices, and past wounds shape current perceptions. Avoidance prevents the integration of experience, leaving the psyche trapped in repetitive loops. You may find yourself responding disproportionately to small events or withdrawing from situations that resemble earlier pain. These reactions are not signs of weakness, but signals that something unresolved is seeking attention. Without awareness, these signals grow louder, often disrupting life in increasingly disruptive ways. Awareness changes the dynamic entirely. To become aware is not to judge or eliminate inner conflict, but to observe it. When attention is brought to what was previously avoided, the psyche begins to reorganize. Awareness creates a space in which conflicting parts can coexist without domination. In this space, fear can be recognized as fear, anger as anger, rather than being acted out unconsciously. This recognition reduces their compulsive force. Integration occurs when opposing tendencies are held in consciousness simultaneously. Instead of choosing one side and repressing the other, awareness allows dialogue. The psyche moves toward wholeness when contradictions are acknowledged rather than denied. This process requires patience, as integration is gradual. Awareness must be sustained long enough for understanding to replace reaction. Each moment of conscious observation weakens the grip of unconscious conflict. As awareness deepens, responsibility naturally follows. You begin to see how inner states influence behavior, and this insight restores agency. Instead of being driven by impulses you do not understand, you gain the ability to respond thoughtfully. Inner conflict loses its destructive edge when it is understood as part of the human condition rather than a personal failure. Through awareness, tension becomes information rather than threat. Avoidance isolates inner material, awareness reconnects it. What was once feared becomes known, and what is known can be integrated. This integration brings a sense of inner coherence and calm, not because conflict has vanished, but because it is no longer fought blindly. The psyche regains balance when awareness replaces avoidance, allowing energy once spent on inner struggle to be used for growth and purposeful living. Self-focus restores inner authority and emotional stability, expended in time-funded words without subheading and conclusions. Self-focus restores inner authority and emotional stability because it returns attention to the place where meaning and regulation originate. When focus is scattered outward, constantly responding to demands, opinions, and emotional currents of others, the inner center weakens. Decisions begin to feel reactive rather than chosen, and emotions fluctuate according to external circumstances. This instability is not caused by sensitivity alone, but by the absence of a grounded inner reference point. Self-focus rebuilds that reference, allowing the psyche to stand on its own foundation. Inner authority develops when a person learns to listen inwardly before responding outwardly. This does not mean ignoring others, but prioritizing internal signals such as values, limits, and emotional truth. When these signals are consistently acknowledged, the psyche learns that it is being respected. Over time, this respect translates into self-trust. Emotional stability emerges as reactions are no longer dictated by immediate stimuli, but guided by an internal compass that remains steady even in uncertainty. Without self-focus, emotions are easily hijacked. A careless remark can feel devastating, and approval can feel intoxicating. The psyche becomes dependent on feedback to regulate its inner state. Self-focus interrupts this dependency by encouraging reflection rather than reaction. When attention is directed inward, emotions are experienced as information rather than commands. This shift reduces emotional volatility and creates space for thoughtful response. Self-focus also clarifies responsibility. Instead of blaming circumstances or others for inner discomfort, attention turns to understanding personal patterns of interpretation and reaction. This understanding restores agency. You begin to recognize that while you cannot control events, you can influence how you meet them. This recognition strengthens inner authority because it places power back where it belongs within conscious choice. As inner authority strengthens, boundaries become clearer. You are less likely to overextend yourself or betray your own needs for acceptance. Emotional stability grows from this clarity as inner conflict decreases. Saying no becomes possible without guilt, and saying yes becomes intentional rather than compulsive. The psyche relaxes when it no longer has to defend itself against constant intrusion. Self-focus also deepens emotional literacy. By observing feelings without immediate action, you learn their language. Sadness, anger, and fear reveal their underlying messages rather than overwhelming awareness. This understanding allows emotions to move through the psyche instead of becoming stuck. Stability does not mean the absence of emotion, but the capacity to experience emotion without being consumed by it. Over time, self-focus creates a quiet confidence. You rely less on reassurance and more on inner alignment. Emotional stability becomes a natural outcome of consistency between inner awareness and outer action. Inner authority is restored not through dominance or control, but through attentive presence. When focus remains rooted within, the psyche stands upright, balanced, and capable of meeting life without losing itself. Rebuilding creates alignment, not isolation, allowing healthier engagement with life, expended in 500 words without subheading and conclusions. Rebuilding creates alignment, not isolation, allowing healthier engagement with life, because true inner work does not pull a person away from the world, but prepares them to meet it with clarity and stability. When rebuilding is misunderstood, it can appear as withdrawal or emotional distance, yet its purpose is not separation, it is the restoration of inner coherence. Alignment begins when inner values, emotions, and actions are brought into harmony, reducing the inner noise that once distorted perception and behavior. Before rebuilding, engagement with life is often driven by compensation. Relationships are used to fill inner gaps, achievements are pursued to soothe insecurity, and distractions are sought to escape discomfort. These patterns create dependence rather than connection. Rebuilding shifts the source of fulfillment inward, not to eliminate relationships, but to free them from unconscious demand. When inner needs are acknowledged and addressed, others are no longer burdened with the task of completing you. Alignment allows presence. When inner conflict is reduced, attention becomes available for genuine engagement. You listen more fully, respond more thoughtfully, and participate without defensiveness. The need to protect an unstable self-image diminishes, making interaction less strained. This presence is often felt by others as calmness or authenticity. You are no longer performing or seeking confirmation, you are simply there. Isolation arises when rebuilding is confused with avoidance. True rebuilding does not deny relationship, it clarifies it. As inner alignment strengthens, boundaries become natural rather than rigid. You know where you end and others begin, which prevents enmeshment without creating distance. This clarity allows intimacy without loss of self. Healthy engagement depends on this balance, where connection does not require self-betrayal. When alignment is present, conflict becomes manageable. Disagreements no longer threaten identity because self-worth is internally grounded. This makes dialogue possible without escalation or withdrawal. You can tolerate difference without needing to dominate or disappear. Engagement becomes an exchange rather than a struggle. Life feels less chaotic because reactions are guided by inner steadiness rather than impulse. Rebuilding also restores curiosity. When you are not consumed by unresolved inner turmoil, interest in the world naturally returns. You engage not from need, but from openness. Experiences are met as they are, rather than filtered through unresolved fear or expectation. This openness enriches life, deepening relationships and expanding perspective. Alignment creates a sense of belonging that is not dependent on conformity. You feel connected because you are integrated within yourself. From this place, engagement with life becomes healthier, more sustainable, and more meaningful. Rebuilding does not shrink your world, it refines how you inhabit it. With inner alignment restored, participation becomes intentional, and connection becomes an expression of wholeness rather than a search for completion. Give me a suitable ending of this speech. And so, rebuilding yourself is not a retreat from life, nor a rejection of others. It is a return to your center, where clarity replaces confusion and intention replaces reaction. As alignment strengthens within, engagement with the world becomes more honest and less demanding. You no longer reach outward to fill what was missing, because what was missing has been faced and integrated. From this place, you meet life with steadiness, relate without losing yourself, and move forward, not fractured, but whole, capable of connection that comes from strength rather than need.